Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI is a 2017 non-fiction book by American journalist David Grann. The book first came to my attention, as I'm sure it did for many, when before the release of The Irishman in 2019, Martin Scorsese announced his next film as an adaptation of Killers of the Flower Moon. The movie went into production very quickly. It started shooting in 2021, and it would have done so a lot sooner if it wasn't for COVID. And Scorsese secured the talent of both his longtime muses Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio for the film. Now this book is one that details an incredible true saga of American history that at the time was swept under the carpet and still is swept under the carpet, not well known at all, not covered in the history books, and it's actually Grann's investigative journalist work that shed light on and uncovered much of the story. So it's this very book which put the events on the map, in a manner of speaking, and the movie will of course give it even greater attention. So if nothing else, even if the book was disjointed, boring, written without discipline, even if it was a terrible book, it isn't by the way, it's fantastic, but even if it was, if nothing else, this is an important book, a very important book, a documentation of a series of historical events drenched, drowned in oppression, racial injustice, greed and murder. So the book concerns the Native American Osage tribe, a people who lived in Kansas until the 1870s, when the US government decided that their land was far too valuable for the natives to own, and they were subsequently forced off their own land. And this case of ethnic cleansing isn't even close to the worst thing to be subjugated to the Osages. It isn't even the premise of the story. The Osages were moved to northeastern Oklahoma, a patch of ground deemed to be worthless, but in the early 20th century, oil was discovered beneath their reservation, and all of a sudden, the Osage people became the richest people in the world per capita. However, as even recent history shows us, when there is oil, the US will shortly be there, and the federal government deemed the Osage people incapable of managing their own affairs and money and came up with a racist system where Osage individuals with oil head rights were assigned white guardians to manage their affairs. And the way it worked was that the more of a Native American you were, the less control over your own money you had. The already unjust system was completely abused, of course. For example, if an Osage wanted a car, the guardian might buy it for $250 and then sell it to the native for $1,250. The guardians would exploit the situation and channel funds through their own businesses, and I've mentioned in previous videos of a particularly distressing case of an Osage woman needing money for her own baby, her own money I might add, to get medical care for her sick baby, but her guardian ignored her pleas and the baby died. So already the Osage natives are in a dire state, where they've been forced off their land and then essentially had their own wealth stolen and cut off from them. But then, this is where the story actually starts, because in the 1920s, Osage natives began dying in mysterious circumstances. It's worth mentioning that the oil head rights could not be bought from the natives, so it doesn't matter how rich you were. If you were some big-time white businessman and you wanted the oil, you could not outright buy the rights from the natives, but the rights could be inherited. So anyway, some natives were poisoned, others shot. There was one instance of a man being pushed off a train and another of a couple's house being blown up with them in it. The death toll reached over 20, and the widespread concern in Osage County was ignored by the local law enforcement, so they went to the federal government, and J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the Bureau of Investigations — it wouldn't be called the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, until around a decade later — sent in a team of agents led by Tom White, a genuinely good man who wanted to help, to bring to light what exactly was going on. There was great difficulty. People didn't want to talk. Some were in on it, some were bullied into silence, some, and these are white people I'm talking about, were killed before they could give evidence. It became more and more clear that this was not the works of a single man, but a widespread conspiracy, one that, it would eventually be revealed, included lawyers, judges, doctors, the law, you name it. I cannot imagine the fear, the sense of helplessness seeing your family members around you being systematically exterminated. The book's main Osage subject is Molly Burkhart, a woman married to the white Ernest Burkhart. Numerous members of her family, including her mother, her sister, and her child, die, and conveniently the oil head rights pass through the family until they end up in her hands, and all of a sudden, she starts to fall ill. Ernest is the nephew of a powerful cattleman, William Hale, and if Molly was to die, the head rights would belong to Ernest. I'll leave the details there, but I think you can see where this is going. I've heard this book described as a murder mystery. I don't really see that. It becomes quite clear who is the mastermind behind the conspiracy early on. One of the things I found most fascinating was the difficulty in Tom White building a case and landing a conviction against the perpetrators, as the villains have essentially bought the court. It's really mainly due to one character getting cold feet and admitting his part that prison sentences are handed out, but really, despite the Bureau's best effort, justice was never really carried out, and the entire saga remains one of the darkest in American history. The least that can happen is that more light is shed on the events through this book and Martin Scorsese's movie. There are several key characters in the book: Molly, Ernest, William Hale, Tom White, amongst others. One thing I found really interesting, amongst many things, was the theme of change. Many of the investigators, including White, are former Texas Rangers, and not the kind of agents that Hoover has in mind for his new bureau, men in snappy suits with a college education. White can see that his way of doing things is disappearing, and he often wears a cowboy hat, perhaps a way of clinging on to his cowboy ways. Speaking of cowboys, as it takes place in the 1920s, the entire landscape is changing. The Old West is past the state of dying. America has become industrialized. And with the Osages as well, this theme of change is apparent. Molly sees the youth forced to attend United States schools where they are taught the white man's education and lose their ancient values and beliefs. In terms of a movie, there's so much that can be done with this story, so many different things that can be focused on, both in terms of story and theme. Especially seeing as though Grann does write like a journalist a lot, so there's a lot for the filmmakers to play with, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Scorsese can do with the story. The book is suspenseful and sickening. The latter stages where Grann records his travels to Osage County are filled with a sense of melancholy, eeriness, and a haunting nature. The ruthless treatment of Native Americans by the white immigrant colonialist settlers is a part of history that even today is not given the limelight it deserves. But Grann has managed to record a small portion of it, a particularly brutal one, in fine fashion, both in terms of his historical content and book writing abilities. Grann's work is highly factual, but it has a flow to it, and his investigative work is so thorough that he uncovers threads of unprosecuted guardians and individuals who should have faced punishment but didn't, in addition to those that did. Killers of the Flower Moon is a disturbing and powerful read, and it comes highly recommended. Thanks for watching.